everybody. Good morning. It's Wednesday. We have survived, and I'm here to give you my regular Wednesday live stream. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard. You're on Book Talk, and I am a historical fiction writer, and I've got another historical fiction writer here for you today, as well as an eclectic reader. So Paula Butterfield, would you consider yourself an eclectic reader?
I think so. Not as eclectic as I could be, but if I'm not reading historical fiction, and especially about women artists, I find myself skewing towards Japanese authors often, because just such a different sensibility. And what else would I read that could be considered eclectic? I'll have to think about that.
All right. Well, I'll introduce you with your actual bio. So give me a second here, and I'll give you a second to think about it. So Paula Butterfield developed and taught courses about women artists for 20 years before turning to writing about them. La Luministe is her first novel. We might hear from that in a little bit. And she lives with her husband and daughter in Portland and on the Oregon coast. So she's a fellow regional writer. And she's currently working on her next book about two rival American artists. But that is all we get to know about it at the moment. So she's keeping us in suspense. So reading, writing. How about anything else you do that's associated with books? Hint, hint, hint. That we'd love to hear about. Begins with an R.
Oh, you mean writing reviews?
Yeah.
I hardly even consider mine reviews, because I think of reviewers sometimes as gatekeepers, and I don't really like to review books that I did not care for at all. I think of myself more as someone with missionary zeal, just trying to get those books out there, the books I loved, out to people who could enjoy them. But yes, I do write reviews.
So you're a hype guy.
I guess so. Yeah, I'm a fan.
We were talking about this. I think on a Mighty Blaze call, we were talking about like what our position is, because I think a lot of writers who are readers are in this weird space of like, how do I define my role and not get mixed up in like someone else's misperception of what I'm saying, and there's some lines you don't want to cross there. And I think what we basically concluded is that we want to be seen as having integrity in our opinions and what we share, and not lying to people, obviously. But we also want to be really excited about people's books that we want to support. And so you kind of have to choose and just choose the ones you like to lift up, and just, kind of let go of the rest, or don't say anything.
Yeah. I mean, as a fellow writer, I don't want to trash anybody's book. And if I didn't like it, I just won't talk about it.
Yeah. That's basically what we came to. Yeah. So I'm going to welcome the people that said hello already this morning. RC is in the chat with a Japanese anime image in his thing. Speaking of Japanese writers, Cool Gamer said hello. And Chrissy just stepped in and waved to say hello. Hello, everybody. If you've got questions for Paula, historical fiction writer, Pacific Northwest writer, women and art connoisseurs, definitely pop them in the chat, right? And okay, so that's reviews. The other thing I was curious about, I've got some like fun questions. Where would you love to do a writer's retreat? What kind of retreat mood are you after?
I mean,
I know you've done one at home, but like if the budget was no limit.
Yeah. No limit. Oh gosh. Because then you want a wonderful place, but not one that's distracting. Because
consideration.
So that's a difficult one. That's difficult. I will say I really love writing at my beach house. Especially in the winter when like no one's around. And it's just trees and rain, and I can get that here too, of course, in Portland.
Right. Okay, so how different is the Oregon coast in the winter from the summer, weather-wise? Because
quite
I've been in both.
People, I almost don't want to tell you this, but I mean, it can be beautiful almost all summer and into the fall. I think people hit bad days and don't realize that it's just not always like that. How it's different. The way it's not different is that it has just that certain smell. You can smell the seagrass, the manzanita trees. that I find just intoxicating. And just people aren't there.
Yeah.
It's just solitude. It's you and your thoughts, and then your characters start talking and entering the conversation.
Well, that's good. I
Hmm.
mean, that's a good characteristic for a retreat location.
Oh yes.
Um, I would say manzanita. I guess I never noticed the smell. The first I knew about manzanita was that it will take over a hillside in Northern California. One of my chores growing up was like hacking it back.
Oh.
So, yeah, and it burns very fast. So that's also sort of a danger. Mason in the dark is here. Hello, Mason. He's talking about the reviews and saying that's pretty much my approach, unless I
Mhm.
think I can get an entertaining rant out of it. Yes. And especially if it's not in your genre and you don't think you might cross paths with that author again.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
you can see clearly that they're a flash in the pan and you're like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
going to ride this trend, etc., and be entertaining in some way.
Mhm.
Mason's got a question. Do you find that the seasons or maybe even just the weather influence your approach to writing?
Well, okay. Are any of these other people Northwest writers also?
Mason
Because
is in the UK.
oh, okay. Well, could be similar because I
Yep.
find as soon as rainy season starts, I'm ready to get to work. That's that. And
Oh, okay.
I think growing up in the Northwest, then I went down to graduate school in LA, and it was really hard because whenever it was a sunny day, the expectation was you have to go enjoy this now. If you're raised in Portland,
Right, right.
yeah,
Scarce resource, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, when it's foggy and rainy, well, like this last weekend that we were talking about how horrible the weather was, that is prime writing weather in my book.
Yeah. There's another author tuber, Just Eva, who would agree with you. She was explaining a Saturday morning that's rainy and foggy when I get up early before the kids up, and like that is the perfect writing time. And she had like this perfect mood
Yeah,
described, which was great.
just add coffee.
Yeah, I'm the reverse. I grew up in California, so I took the sun
Mhm.
and like the 70-degree perfect day for granted.
Yes.
And now I'm here because I feel like I belong in the foggy forest sort of type of area. But in terms of work, for Mason's question, if it's too bad and I can't go out walking in it and pretend I'm a little forest sprite, then I will stay home. But especially in the past few years, if it's too bad, it sort of seeps into my mood and I just can't
Mhm.
focus on anything. So there's
After
like,
a while, yeah, that can
yeah,
happen. Hmm.
yeah. Chrissy says, I live in New Mexico. Albuquerque weather changes with frequency.
Hmm.
Interesting. Is Albuquerque up on the mesa? I can't remember my geography of
Probably. Plus,
Mexico.
they get a lot of wind, and that can blow in different kinds of weather systems. Don't get me started on meteorology. My,
Okay, okay, we'll rein it back in. Mason says I'm a hermit and never leave the house, so I don't have that problem.
aren't we all now at this point?
Pretty much, pretty much. Although I did go out last night. It's probably like the 10th event that he had, but my friend Neil Cochran has a book out that came out in October called The Story of the Hundred Promises. And I couldn't get to the Powell's one, and I couldn't get to the whatever other events. And so finally I saw this one. And I was like, I'm making a break for it. And I drove out and I got there just in time. And it was a great little event and I got to catch up a little. So it was wonderful.
Good, good.
It's in a valley. Oh,
Ooh,
okay. By the Sandia Mountains. Oh, nice. So we are
mhm.
learning about geography, but
Yes.
we'll leave meteorology for a second. Um, Paula, I have explored your website a little bit and I see you've got a menu, a playlist, and a painter, obviously, is your main character. Which
Hmm.
sensory organ gives you the most inspiration to write fiction? I thought this was interesting that you
Mm.
had such a
Hmm.
diverse array.
Yeah, I have a playlist, but I can't listen to any music
Oh,
when I'm writing. Again, I have to hear the voices, and I can't hear them as well if there's background music. So which would it be? Smells, I think. Um, well, and yeah, the art, the visuals.
hmm. I was just on a talk at a Mighty Blaze with Katie Hayes, who wrote The Cloisters, and she was talking about wanting to create a very claustrophobic feel. And
Hmm.
so I asked her, like, in paintings, what gives you that claustrophobic feeling. I
Mhm.
thought that was really interesting. What would you say is the feeling that you get from a lot of Berthe Morisot's work, who is the main character of
Thank you
your
for the French accent, which I do not possess. So, um, um, they're cloistered but not claustrophobic,
Mm,
because that for that you need really shallow space. And you can see this is one of Barrett's paintings, not an original. Um, and yeah, so there's space around them. And by the way, whenever she painted her loved ones, this is her sister and niece. Um, she would cocoon them, like
mhm,
give them a little safety halo here. But so there's space, but her portraits of women, she wanted to reflect the lives of women. So they're always constrained in some way. At the back of this garden, there's a line of trees. Often she portrays women on balconies or on a, let's see, what else do I have? Um, where there's a fence, just contained areas, because that was the life of women in her time.
right, right. Interesting.
Mhm.
And when you say cocooned in a way, is that by like blurring the strokes around it so it seems like its own area that's set off, or you just mean like color in general around the figures?
Sort of, this isn't quite so much, but you can see like curving strokes almost encircling them. That's
Okay,
what I mean by a cocoon.
okay.
Yeah.
So for Mason, especially who's in the audience today, we're looking at, is there a name of that painting, by the way?
I don't remember.
Okay, so it's a Berthe Morisot painting, and there's a woman and a child. The woman is looking back at the painter. The child is looking out towards a river.
No, it's a garden.
Okay, it
It's,
looks like a
it's
green reflected river to me, but
okay.
then at the top there's a hedge
There's
or
some
it.
chairs and a picnic basket, and then a line of trees enclosing
Oh, okay,
the
okay,
garden. Hmm.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
interesting.
I do know titles of Barrett's paintings. However, she's one of those who often just would write untitled, and so people just write different titles for them all the time.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah. So,
interesting.
yeah.
All right, well, that leads me right to my next question. How did you decide on the title? It's French, La Luministe. It's like
Yeah.
delicious for me. So how did you decide on that?
So, and it means, one who makes light or something. The other impressionists, Monet and Degas and Renoir and the guys, that's what they called her. They
Oh,
thought she had this gift for portraying light, which was one of the main things all of the Impressionists were trying to do. They all had very different styles, but that was one thing they definitely were into, painting outside and studying the effects of light. And they thought she was just so far beyond the rest of them in doing that.
wow, very cool. On
Yeah.
plein air. Okay, so when I think of light in paintings, my two favorite things to look at are light on clothing, especially women's like silk
Mhm.
dresses, and that's
Mhm.
amazing how people can do that, and light on lace. And I think that's mostly
Huh.
like a couple centuries earlier than the
No, no,
Impressionists.
no, no,
No?
no, no, no. Well, it started then, sure, but yeah, they were definitely still doing it. And I would suggest that you look up a painting called "Girl by the Window,"
Is
so
that
you can
Vermeer?
see. Hmm?
Is that Vermeer?
No, it's by Barrett Morisot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I
Um,
think of Vermeer. Okay.
Sometimes they also call it summer. Like I said, these names don't stick real hard, um,
Interesting.
because that is one thing she wanted to do was blend light in such a way that the figure, the person, and the ground, the background, just mushed together. So that painting shows sun pouring in a window and almost like melting the dress that the woman is wearing. Um, it just becomes light.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I'll go look it up for sure.
Okay.
Um, yeah, interesting. I don't I'm trying to think if I remember any specific painting. I would go to the Musée d'Orsay every time I went to
Mhm.
Paris when I was traveling, which I don't do anymore.
Right.
But I remember going through certain rooms, and of course, there's the big names or the big name paintings that would have all the crowds that I would always avoid because I'm allergic to hype, as Chrissy knows. But yeah, I did love Impressionists because the Musée d'Orsay is mostly that era.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I don't remember seeing her highlighted. I'm sure she's there, but like not that comes out of my memory of like 10 years ago.
Well, they just had a one woman retrospective of her work there. That
Ooh.
first was here. I saw it in Philadelphia, and it went
Mm,
to Dallas, then it went to Canada, then it went to the D'Orsay. Um, but they don't always show everybody. Only 10% of museums' art is shown ever.
right. Right.
But they usually have out Manet's painting, The Balcony, which
Okay.
shows Bert again enclosed by a balcony.
Oh, she's
Um,
in it. Okay.
oh yeah. Oh, he painted her more often than any other model, and he never sold any of those paintings. This is part of my argument. People go, "Well, now, what makes you think that they had an affair?" Well, I have my arguments ready to convince people about that.
Oh,
And
nice.
that was part of it, and, also the fact that she burned her diaries
Mm.
from the years that she modeled for him.
Ooh,
Not
it's
fishy
pretty
at all.
telling. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right.
yeah. Where were we?
Mason. Yeah, Mason saying I'm a sucker for a well-lit landscape, or I was.
Well, I was reading what Mason wrote up here. "I'm quite a visual writer. My mind's eye can see perfectly." That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're talking about, I had a thought occur to me during your last comment, and now I'm probably going to lose the thread.
Mhm.
Let's see. Um,
About the light, about
Museums, I
oh,
think, actually. We're probably both museum lovers, right?
oh, yeah.
We'll
Mhm,
always visit museums when we go to a place.
mhm,
And when you said they only display like 10% or less of their collections, and most of it's just warehoused or in a archive, temperature controlled archive somewhere, that made me remember. And since it is Native American Heritage Month, I'll just
yeah,
bring this in, that a lot of the archaeology museums, natural history museums have the same thing with artifacts and effects of indigenous tribes in the US and I assume Canada as well.
mhm,
And it's one thing for art and paintings that they own, but for cultural artifacts, I feel like there's sort of some more responsibility towards either showing it or
mhm.
giving it back. Don't
Giving it
you have
back
any,
and
I don't know, I didn't prep you on this. Do you have any opinions on
oh,
this?
yeah, I sure do.
Yeah.
Repatriation is a huge thing right now.
Yes.
Um, I went to school one year in southern Mexico, and one of the big majors there was archaeology. And those students would come back on campus every day, like with artifacts,
Mm,
and just take them home to the States. And there used to be no protections, but um, a, a country's artwork, that's its patrimony. It's hard almost for us to compare. We don't have such a long tradition of art to get upset about losing, but people have said things like, what if someone, well, actually John Oliver said this a couple weeks ago on his show. What
the
if someone,
Liberty Bell?
yeah, the Liberty Bell, or Betsy Ross's flag, or something like that.
Yeah.
um, but even so, during World War II, there was the fear of German submarines on the East Coast.
Mm,
A lot of art from the Smithsonian museums was taken away and hidden in various rural locations in Virginia and stuff.
mm.
So we care. That is who we are. It tells the story of who we are. So, what was the question? That's where I stand on patrimony. Things need to be given back.
Yeah.
Getty Museum, I'm
To the
talking to
culture
you.
for whom they're important, basically, right?
Hmm.
To the culture for whom they're important, because I
Yes.
feel like
Yes.
when John Oliver was talking about that art conversation, he had that whole spoof of the museum that was
Yes.
made up of things that like would be important to us. um I feel like people have had something so long and it's been available to them for so long that they feel they have ownership of it, and
Mhm.
that's not the same thing as those objects being culturally important, so that might be hard for some Brits to parse, I feel like.
Mhm. Plus
The
that condescending thing of, well, they weren't taking good care of it.
Oh,
We
yeah, there's that
we
whole
know
side
how
too.
to care for nice things.
Right.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah.
Yes. We like John Oliver. Good to know.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so how about another fun question, which is what is the most Parisian thing about you, since your main character in the action is somewhat Parisian?
Okay, that's interesting. Portland and Paris have some things in common.
Ooh,
First of
okay.
all,
I don't know this.
cafe culture, which Yeah, I could go sit in a cafe and drink coffee all day long and talk with
Okay.
people.
All right.
Um, that's one thing, and then the other thing is, so we have Forest Park in Portland. It's a legit forest within city limits. The only other city in the world, and I had 2 research librarians confirm this,
That.
is is Paris, and it's the Bois de Boulogne, and it's a legit forest inside a city.
Mm.
So I think we're already a little bit Parisian. One thing I wish I could do to be Parisian was learn how to tie a scarf. Wouldn't you love to be able to just like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
French ladies do?
The art of the foulard. Yeah. I just
Yeah,
get a big enough shawl that like that overwhelms the need to tie a knot. And so
there you go. There you go.
that's my
And I
strategy.
was through as I did with my Campfire Girl scarf. So
Ah, there we go. Nice. I went actually, I got dressed and I was trying to think of a little, I don't know, a way to be dressy to honor the occasion of the interview. And I ended up with something that kind of reminded me of my French Catholic school nun teachers.
oh,
So I have like a collared shirt and a knit vest and then a long necklace. And I was
there
like,
you
this
go.
is definitely what Sister Jan looks like every day.
So
So
you had
French Catholic.
not French nuns, but a French school.
What's
Because
that?
I went to school with nuns, but they were not French. But are
Oh,
you saying
neither
the
were
nuns?
mine.
Okay, but the school was of a French heritage or something?
Mine?
Yeah.
No, 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 it was just Catholic school.
Oh, okay, just Catholic.
Yes. But it
I'm
reminds me
guessing
of,
not.
like, Coco Chanel drew her inspiration for her designs from the nuns that were in her French childhood kinda thing, and so that's what it made
Mhm,
me think of.
mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
Ugh, okay.
Angela Spears, welcome, hello.
Oh,
Hair in the garden is pretty. It does look like water from a distance, yeah. And
mhm,
Angela might know the painting for its own and not be like me, like an art amateur. So appreciate that.
mhm.
Mason said, literally shook my head at that. I think that's probably like the British attitude we were talking about in repatriation. I think timing is always hard with the lag. So let us know if I got it wrong.
Mhm, mhm.
How about you were talking a little bit about first person POV,
Mhm.
and I know Mason has opinions on this as
Oh,
well.
good. Oh,
And
good.
in tags, yeah. So, what is your approach? What is your favorite? And what do you
Mhm.
think that delivers for the reader in your book? And maybe it's different for the second book. Maybe you get a peek.
Not
What
yet.
about that? Okay.
Not yet. Um, okay, so I know some people do have strong anti first person feelings, and I would really like to hear about that because to me, it is just the way to, like, Margaret, I pick you up and I plop you inside Bert Morisot's head.
Mm,
And just get in there and know what it was like for her to make a painting, what it was like to be rejected by Edouard Manet, um, all those things. I just want to be as close in as possible. So that's how I feel about first person. And okay, I'll start defending it before people start.
I can give you actually what I heard someone say yesterday.
Okay.
They don't like first person POV with YA novels
Oh.
because they're frustrated with the immaturity that is required for that character to be realistic in that age range.
Oh.
And so that was just like, ugh. You kind of
Mm,
realize that it needs to be there, but then you're frustrated being like trapped in that, going, God, that would not be my
mm.
decision, but now I'm trapped in this voice. So
That would be frustrating. Yeah.
different, yeah.
I do start when Bert is still a teenager, but fortunately, I go through most of her
Progressive.
life, so she does
Mm.
mature. Um, yeah. Okay. And one thing I think people say is that the word I comes up too much. But you can get around that. For instance, Bert and her sister, Edma, both started out as painters, and they had their own studio at a certain point that their father built in their backyard. Um, and so Edma says things to her like, Bert, you're getting that fierce look on your face again. What are you thinking?
Mm.
Or I know what you're thinking, or something like that. And so it doesn't always have to be Bert going, I was feeling really furious about such and such. You don't have to do it that way.
Mm. You can take
Or, hmm?
You can take in other people's observations because you have that sort
Yes.
of reflected in
Yeah.
dialogue, which is nice. Yeah.
Or just word it differently. Like, I was really distracted by all the noise outside. You can just say, you know, the carriage clattering past on the cobblestones drew me away from my work. There's ways around it. It could be really boring if you just said I.
Did you hear the sirens? Is that why the example came to you?
No,
Because I just
no, I
had
think.
sirens like police go by.
Oh, uh-huh.
Okay.
I'm
Interesting.
reading
And
some of
your
the.
carriage on the cobbles example leads me to confess that I just finished a nonfiction about some artists and some women, but usually separate.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a group biography about the McDonald sisters. Have I told you about this before?
No, but I know about them. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
The
So
Glasgow Girls, isn't that what they were called, or the Glasgow Group, or something like that? They were Scottish.
uh no, they're not in Glasgow. So this may be different. These are not women who are artists. These are four sisters who
Okay.
two married famous artists and two had sons who were famous people. So the mother of Stanley Baldwin, the mother of Rudyard Kipling, the
Oh,
wife
wow.
of the arts and crafts folks that I can't remember the name of at the moment,
Yeah.
but big, big in that era. That's right before, yeah, before um, the Impressionists, but writing and artists and like
Hmm. Interesting.
it is very interesting how there was like a circle and there was critique and there was like jockeying for position because everyone
Yes.
needed money as artists and
Yeah.
like but they
Yeah.
got up. They built up through political maneuvering and like some weird things. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Were they, I'm guessing, all from privileged families where they had educations and connections
Well, they're
already?
four sisters. So they're all from one family and they weren't that well off. And so this is why it's sort of they were gentry, but they weren't anyone like, you know,
Hmm.
big rich. They were kind of like bourgeoisie. So
Hmm.
it's interesting.
Hmm. Yeah,
Some
that
of
is.
them took off and some of them were the poor relations their whole life, which is kind of an interesting dynamic to have in one family.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
is. That never goes well. No.
Yeah. Right. But
Um,
it would be good to write about. That's the sort of great
oh,
like
sure.
dynamic. Yeah.
Sure would. Okay, so you were talking about sort of rivalry between these different people. And it's funny because in La Luministe, it started out. Okay, let me back up. I just reread it for the first time since it came out, which was 3.5 years ago.
Mm.
Because after you've read it over 100 times, you know, and
Yeah.
then everybody was telling me how many typos there were.
Oh no.
And I had gone through 3 times, allegedly, so had my editor. And every time they sent it back to me again, there were different typos.
Oh
And I
no.
correct those. And so everyone said, it ended up with a ton of typos, which is nauseating.
Frustrating.
Um, it's like seeing your child being taken care of by somebody else and their hair's on sideways and their shirt's backwards. It's just like,
Yeah.
no. Anyway, but I forced myself to read it again because the last talk I did like this, I realized I had forgotten a bunch of stuff that was in there. um, so I remembered that when I started writing it, I wanted it to be about Berthe Morisot and Mary Cassatt
Mm.
because they were rivals at first.
Okay.
And then they ended up, liking each other. But at first, Mary Cassatt, well, she was the first American to barge into the Impressionist group. And before that, Berthe had been the only woman, and
Mm.
she liked that position.
Right.
Um, and then Mary Cassatt was also like tall and gangly and had a terrible American accent, and Berthe did not understand her at all. So, but then they grew to admire one another's art, and they realized they were the only women in this group, and yeah, so that changed. But so I've carried that theme into my new work in progress of women's rivalry and how,
Mm.
having taught women's art history, all through history, there's been like one spot for the exceptional woman, sort of the dancing bear who had this inexplicable talent to do something. And I mean, from way back in the time of the King Louis, the ballerinas, the first ballerinas, there had to be just one who was the star at the time. And, that's just BS. I just get so tired of hearing about that. And I'm more tired of it because it's still going on.
Right.
Like, I think, at least until very recently, Katy Perry and Taylor Swift feuded? Because who was the most
Oh, I don't pay attention.
the biggest pop star? Okay.
Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has won that argument in the handy landslide of having the top number one
top
hit,
10.
top 10. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate the point of like women always getting put into the position of like there can only be one. All the rest of the slots are for men. So duke it out.
Yourselves, girls.
Right,
Yeah.
for the scraps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a repetition of I think what the 1% does in a class manner.
Oh,
like
sure.
they'll have the lion's share, and all the rest of the people, lower class, middle class, all the rest of the 99% can fight over the scraps in an unfair system. So, hey,
Yeah.
welcome to my channel.
Okay, I'm looking at some more comments.
Yeah, so we had some reactions to the first person. Let me pop those up so I don't get too far. Angela said that's an interesting take on first person. I think referring to your comment about plopping you in the character's head. Jason said, in my Bleeding Ground audios, the hero is first person. The villain is a close third because he's an ancient snob. Interesting. He's still early in his authorial journey, so learning to get around the eye issue has been a challenge. Okay.
You'll get used to it.
This is why I just narrate all my writings. Blindness means I miss mistakes in the physical version. So just making it an audio gets around that. Wait, so does that mean that all the things that you're publishing are only in audio? No, you have ebooks. So you do have someone check it for you and you have to trust that person.
Or is he talking about the audio where you can
dictation?
Yeah, you can have your computer read it back to you.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Which is fun. Have you ever done that? You can choose the voice that reads it and stuff.
I haven't. I used to think that was really cool when I had maps giving me directions and I wanted to download like the different voices, and I wanted Smeagol to give me directions from Lord of the Rings. I thought it'd be cool. But then I was like, but I'm not going to pay for that and like get into the tech of having that on I just couldn't be bothered. So
No, but this is free. And if you want just like that last read before you turn it in, like query it or something, you'll notice stuff that you did not notice otherwise.
I guess hearing the computer narrate back to you would be as effective as having to speak it aloud yourself, which is often what people say you should do before the final submission. Yeah, which I don't do. And then when I read it aloud, I go, oh, I missed something there. I missed something there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Angela had a good point. Having others commenting on the main character's state carries more weight too, because it feels more objective if you're not a unreliable narrator fan. Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Good point. Good point.
Oh, honestly, I hate talkback. I only put up with it because I have to. My writing being read by a robotic voice sometimes makes me question whether or not it's any good.
Well, not all the voices seem that robotic to me. I think you need to try some more voices.
Yeah, there was an ad I was getting for a while that was about an AI voice that was, you couldn't tell this was an AI voice, could you? And I've been talking for 20 seconds. And I was like, and I have to listen to you. I mean, it did sound natural, but I was annoyed with the ad. I couldn't skip. And I forget what company it was for because I try to delete all of that nonsense from my head in terms of ads.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it could be out there, Mason, is what Paula is saying, a different voice to choose that might be more natural sounding.
That might be more like your protagonist's voice.
Yeah, or that too as well for people who have first person point of view. Okay, I'm going to put another silly question in. Have you ever used peanut butter puns for a promotion?
Excuse me? I don't think I have.
No, okay, because your Twitter handle is pbutterwriter for Paula Butterfield, and so I always think peanut butter. That's how it helps me remember. And I thought, I wonder if she's ever used that as a promotion, like I don't know, peanut butter sandwiches for tea time. That's my brain.
And I can always use more promotional ideas. That's for sure. So, good one.
All right.
I see your questions are starting to kind of diminish.
I'm doing silly and substantive. I'm sort of jumping back and forth. So let me also remind people of something that you have out there that is sort of related to me and my channel. You gave a talk at Yola Boca Flow 2020, which was virtual, and you were talking about the siege of Paris because we were
Mhm.
in pandemic conditions and
Mhm.
freaking out about it. So you're kind of giving us a view of a place that had it much, much worse to sort
Oh
of cope
my.
with us.
Uh-huh.
And I've put the link in the chat for anyone who's curious because that was a great presentation. But what about when we hit a wall? So we were talking a little bit
Mhm.
about this in preparation. We're 2.5 years into the pandemic, which is endemic now. Um, as a writer, as a creative, perhaps as a painter for other disciplines, um, how do we cope with that anxiety, or how have you coped,
Mhm.
or how would you see other people managing to rise above it? I don't know. What
Mhm.
are your thoughts?
Oh boy. I wish they were more successful.
Peanut
You
butter.
know,
That's why you wanna go to peanut
peanut
butter.
butter, peanut butter
Yeah,
therapy.
right.
Okay, what's her name who wrote The Artist's Way? Julia
Julia
Cameron.
Cameron.
I really believe in her suggestion or exhortation that you do artist dates where you go and enjoy a completely different art form than yours, which is writing. So I like to go to art galleries. I like to go see obscure foreign films. Whatever you
Ooh.
like to do, it just gets you going in a different way, I think.
Mm,
It's always worked for me at least a little bit. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
interesting. Okay. I like immersing myself in a different environment for observation purposes. I think my most
Mhm.
natural state is observing. I think I remember when I was a kid and I was
Mhm.
feeling lonely, and I sort of like convinced myself that I was observing other people by choice instead of being alone as a little kid on the playground. And
Yeah,
so I think when I return to that and I go on a walk and I notice the trees, or I
yeah.
notice people's front yards and what it says about them, and try to name the plants, like my brain is sort of getting back to its roots. And I feel like that's my reconnect.
And people swear by just walking.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a friend who's a social worker who, when I was young and single and really depressed and obnoxious all the time. Um,
Oh, do tell.
oh yes, oh yes. And look, I've emerged.
Yes.
But she said, "You've got to move. If you're depressed, if you're blocked, you've got to move." I'm like, "I can't move." She goes, "Just get down on the floor, just roll around, just do some kind of
Yep.
movement."
Yep.
Yeah. And for me, up until recently, when I had a bad knee operation, um, I danced my whole life. I know it was no longer appropriate, but I always felt like, yeah, I should show the younger ones how it's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved the, 80s night, 90s night at
Oh
the Crystal
gosh.
Ballroom. That was so fun, and
Mhm.
I haven't been back since the pandemic because it's like, who wants to be in a bunch of sweaty bodies all night, like, with no mask? And
Are
yeah,
they even open again? Are they?
they
Some.
have concerts. I don't know if they have the dance nights
Yeah.
yet, but I definitely see concerts, and they're in that room. I'm sure they're packing them in for ticket sales.
Oh yeah.
That's an
No.
era that I wish, like, could have adapted, but I can't figure out how to adapt it.
Well, I'm just going to put in a word for disco right now because no one ever does. And in the 70s, I was living in Hollywood and there were some good discos. And you know what was good about them?
What?
Guys went wanting to dance. There was none of this, wait till I've had a few beers, hon. There's
Right.
no, I'm not waiting. Come
Right.
on.
That's
Yeah.
the point. It's a dance club. Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes. So you
It
dance by
wasn't.
yourself if you have to or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, Crystal Ballroom outings were always about going with a friend or 2 and just, like, having a time in our little circle. And
Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It wasn't some threat to masculinity like it is today, I feel like, which is good.
Mhm.
Shannon stopped in, so hey, Shannon, thanks for coming by. Um, and I also had another thread that just disappeared, which is fine because
Okay.
Mason has another question for us. Do
Okay.
either of you have any advice in regards to crafting physical character descriptions for someone who's never been able to see facial features? Interesting. So there's
Well,
different parts of this question. You want to
yeah.
tackle it first?
Well, I'm just curious, Mason, how you do observe features. Like if you're touching someone's face to see what they look like,
Which he doesn't because he's an antisocial bastard that stays at home, he said earlier.
Yeah, that makes it harder. But
Yeah.
if you did, like, what would you be looking for? Um, would a big bony nose tell you something? Uh, do you know what I mean? I don't understand. I don't know because I've never done it that way. What you would be observing.
Yeah.
So.
So when I take apart this question, I think, okay, so if I'm watching any type of media in a way that isn't visual, like if I'm listening to oh, I can't remember what it's called right now, but there's something that actually fills in the details of what you're watching during a movie. It's like visual translation for the blind. And if you are listening to someone say, for example, a light brown skinned woman emerges from the cave, she's wearing a shawl and she's looking out suspiciously.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's one level of translating the visual, which is accessible. If
Mhm.
you're reading, I think most of that can be translated to writing on the page, right? What I just said.
Mhm.
But if you want to get into conveying emotion based on facial expression, I
Like
kind of
suspicious. You said she looked suspiciously.
that's telling, not showing, right?
Yeah.
How would I show that in facial description rather than um the adjective? Uh I think some of this is not necessary. Like you can just say suspicious and get across the emotion without going to the root of what someone is perceiving physically and translating into an emotional read. That's
Mhm.
perfectly acceptable. I think if you had to do the physical descriptions throughout the whole book instead of describing like the analytical emotion, that might get a bit tedious because you'd be
Mhm.
saying, you know, her eyes scrunched closed and she what would you say?
She
Um
she looked one way and then the other and
right,
seeing if the
right.
coast was clear or
To
something like
me,
that.
that would get tedious. I appreciate a little bit of narrative judgment that if I trust it, right? So if she
Mhm.
looks suspicious, if she looks skeptical, if she waits for amount of time before she emerges, if she makes a sudden movement, all of those are not necessarily dependent on facial descriptions. They're body
Mhm.
movements, they're um, time
Okay.
indications.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know,
Mhm.
thinking it through now, going, I don't actually use facial descriptions that often. I'll use
Mhm.
something about the eyes.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit tired of the cliche of like the smile didn't reach the eyes. I think I used
Mhm.
that in a blog post recently about being annoyed at cliches. Um, but yeah, so I use a lot of other sort of adjacent tools rather than actual face descriptions. I don't know if that's helpful. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Interesting, interesting. Okay, I have a question, not a question, but something I was thinking about because, last night we had our election. Um, oh, SD Houston, you are
Shannon's very
lucky.
lucky. Yeah, her husband likes to dance.
That's going to be in my next lifetime. When
Yeah,
I'm multilingual, I'm also going to be with a dancer.
nice.
Okay, so I started thinking yesterday about okay, you put the link about Bert during the siege of Paris when
Yes.
they were being starved and frozen by the Germans who had them under siege.
Yes,
Um,
1870, right?
yes, and then after that, in the spring of 1871, there was. Do you know about the communards or the
Yes.
commune?
Les
Okay.
Mis. I mean, I've got some from history and then some from musicals, so I don't know how accurate it is, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. It made me think of because the election deniers, are they going to take their losses sitting down, or are we here going to have violence in our near future? And it made me think of the communards because after France surrendered to Germany, um, the National Guard, well, there were a lot of people in the National Guard, like the upper class, like Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas. Everybody was there trying to protect Paris. But then there were a lot of working class people in the National Guard, and they refused to give up their weapons after the surrender because they didn't know what kind of government was going to come next. They had had monarchy, they had had
Right.
emperors, neither of which really, cared a whole lot about the poor. So they just wanted to kind of wait and see what was going to happen. And, but then they had all these progressive values like feminist values. They wanted better working conditions for people and stuff like that. But then they started getting crazy and they got violent, and they murdered 2 generals, and then they murdered the Archbishop of Paris. And then the provisional government that had come in decided everyone in the commune has to go. So that mob, okay, I'm just thinking that's a different kind of mob. They're sort of a progressive mob, but it's still a mob, and they were very dangerous. And so the French army came in, and in 1 week, they killed 10 to 15,000 communards.
1871?
1871, like May. And it was called the Semaine Sanglante, the Bloody Week. Anyway, I'm just thinking about mobs today. How about you?
Yeah, France has a thing with mobs, I think. I'm trying to remember the name. There was a shout that people used, and it wasn't balustrades, barricades. There we go. To the barricades. That always
Yes.
makes me think of the commune and the violence and
Yeah.
that moment in history.
So we'll see what happens here.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wanted to catch up in the chat. Mason wanted to let you know, for reference, he hasn't always been blind, but has always been visually impaired. So he's got an interesting experience. And his channel is great if you're not already subscribed, Mason in the Dark. And then Angela had a suggestion for Mason. Have you considered buying a few Chia Pets of bust figures like Einstein, Elvira, or Bob Ross? The eyes and facial features are raised. It's kind of fun. Doesn't tend to touch people's faces. I have a terrible aptitude for haptic feedback. I didn't know that's called haptic feedback, unless you're being sarcastic. I can't tell. Because the only time I've learned about haptic feedback is when something buzzes on my phone to my finger. So that's my only definition of it. But let me know if that's wrong. Body language, Shannon is saying. Yeah, I think Shannon uses a lot of body language in her books as well. Her Clash of the Goddesses trilogy. Mason's giving us a little example here. She had the air of somebody clandestine. Okay, so that's definitely telling. Never made eye contact, couldn't stay still. I love that body language. Avoided questions at all costs and talked very little. See this.
Oh well, Mason, it sounds like you've got a handle on it.
Yeah, it appears to me like this is going to be what is it? The Liars of what is that book? That fantasy book?
Anybody know?
Lies of Loch Lamora. That sounds like a good gang heist in the making. I like it. Yeah. Oh, Laura's here. Hey, Lauren Heddles. Her suggesting you could describe how their voices and shoes sound, convey their emotions through tone and word choice instead of facial scrunches. Yep. Rely on senses other than sight to always identify characters. Yep.
Laura also suggests what perfume, what kind of touch do they have?
Yeah. Yep. Other senses. Shannon, if you use eyes too much, Shannon uses eyes a lot. You could say she tilted her head away or down. Also, people who lie tend to look up and to the left. Yeah, like cues. Do a little CIA research as to like body language or tells, I guess you could say.
Yes.
And this was brought up in another chat recently, trying the emotional thesaurus. I can't remember who, but like 3 different people had emotion thesauruses behind them and got them out. And
wow.
They're saying that was really good. Yeah. So Angela and Shannon both love it. Great. So we're rounding towards the end here, and I meant to ask you to read a little bit to give us a hint of the POV for La Luministe. Could you give us a short reading so we get a little excerpt?
This time. Okay, how about their Germany? France has declared war on Germany, but the war has not yet arrived in Paris. So Berthe and her mother are taking one last walk in the Bois de Boulogne. Okay. It was difficult to imagine any need to prepare for war on a glorious day in the Bois de Boulogne, as Mamma and I strolled under a canopy of jewel-colored leaves through warm September breezes. But I took note of changes. There should not have been thousands of sheep and cows grazing in the meadows, brought by farmers from the outskirts of the city who thought to protect their livestock by bringing their herds within city limits. And there should not have been soldiers in their red and blue uniforms trotting their horses down the tree-shaded boulevards where normally fashionable people rode by in their carriages. What seemed impossible to believe must be true. War was approaching. We continued in silence, Mamma and I, enjoying the beautiful autumn afternoon until we passed under the archway that led us out of the park, from heaven to hell. The street was thronged with Parisians trying to escape the city and people from the provinces arriving to seek refuge in it. The privileged crowded into carriages, followed by furniture vans pulled by straining horses. The less fortunate struggled with carts piled high with mattresses, chairs, cookpots, with children in bird cages balanced on top. A cacophony of clomping horses, church bells, and frantic shouting assailed us. It appears that everyone but us is leaving Paris, I said, forcing myself to sound calm amidst the mayhem. These people were running for their lives. Did they imagine Prussian soldiers invading Passy? Cannonballs shooting into the Bois? Cowards! Mamma choked out the word, her strongest censure, as we passed a gentleman hustling his family into a carriage. She raised her voice to say, "This is not my idea of how a man should behave." She was thinking, no doubt, of my brother, Tiburce. Never able to settle upon an occupation, Tiburce had seen the war as an opportunity to embark upon a military career. He'd been among the first to enlist and the first to be captured at the Battle of Sedan, and he was now imprisoned in Mayence. "They say the German line will form at Passy," the indignant gentleman responded. "Shall I not protect my family?" It was plain to see that escape was the only protection he had to offer. His bald head and weak chin made him look as defenseless as a tortoise without its shell. He climbed up next to the carriage driver, shouting, "To the train station!" I wished Papa would see fit to take us away from Paris, but he felt that we were protected by his government position and social status. My position and status as the only unmarried daughter in the family dictated that it was my duty to stay with my parents. One of the peddlers, working his way through the crowds, a young boy crying, "Papier," stepped in front of me. "Mademoiselle, paper and pencil to write your will?" Appalled, I could only shake my head before I hurried to catch up with Mamma, who had sailed down the street with her head held high. In October, Mamma and I made one last foray to the Bois. In little more than a month, the forested park had been sacrificed for firewood. Only a vast field of tree stumps, sharpened to deter invaders, remained. The sheep and cows had disappeared from the meadows. Then the zoo animals, the camel and the antelope and the peacocks, were slaughtered at local butcher shops that were hard-pressed to provide meat for the 2 million citizens who remained in Paris. Word spread that when Castor and Pollux, the beloved elephants that I remembered swaying from side to side when patriotic songs drifted from the bandstand, were shot, their keeper collapsed, weeping, in their pen. The hungry lion and tigers who remained dared anyone to approach them.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah, I'm just reflecting that Portland is called Stumptown, but we're no longer full of
Yeah,
stumps and snags. Yeah, Forest Park has got really, really old trees and it's beautiful.
that part really got to me thinking about it because have you ever been to a concert at the zoo?
Oh, years and years ago.
Yeah, but the elephants come out and sway back and forth.
I don't remember that. I don't think I saw that.
That always just captivated me. So,
Nice.
okay, so if we're almost done, shall I tell people where they can get the book? If they're
Yes.
interested. First of all, if you're interested in any books about women artists, I have a list in my website. But these are not just about art in the plot. These are about actual women artists, but they are historical fiction. So they're still really fun to read. Okay, that's at my website. And then to get the book, there's always Amazon, there's Barnes and Noble. If you're in Canada, you can get it at Chapters Indigo, and you can get it most online places. Now, if you want a physical copy, Amazon does have some, or you can just go straight to my publisher's website, which is Regal House Publishing. That it takes a little longer to get a hardback copy. I mean, IRL copy. But there's lots of digital ways to get it.
Nice. Let's see. Here we go. Regal House sounds familiar. I feel like Leah Inksman was just talking about them.
They've become very popular.
Got it. All right. Very good. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take a quick look at my outline, make sure that I covered everything. I forgot to mention at the beginning 2 things about my channel, just as reminders. If anyone is coming here to see you and haven't seen me before, I just published Fabled Passages, my collection of short stories of historical fantasy. So I splashed out a little into supernatural vibes. But they are mostly set in 18th and 19th century UK settings with a little bit of magic. So if anyone likes that vibe, feel free to check that out in the description. I've also got Patreon. So this is sponsored by patrons. I do a book chat every month and a book club every other month. So they sort of switch off, and so that's what the people who are in the book club are supporting. So shout out to them and a thank you. And I was going to talk a little bit about patrons because I feel like that's an art world concern, but Paula was
Mhm.
like, not for the impressionists. So that's not my that's not my area. Um, but let's see. Is there anything else that I had on my little list? I don't think so. What about I know you're not going to reveal the rivals in your new
Mhm.
book. What about an exciting new research rabbit hole you just fell down that's interesting?
Oh gosh. Yeah, those are always good, aren't they? Oh, so many. Well, my work in progress, which I have now finished several times, takes place in the 1950s in the Cold War era in Manhattan.
Ooh.
So it's a totally different atmosphere.
Mhm.
Um, and let's see, what are the rabbit holes I fell down there? I guess like uh, what they ate at restaurants.
Ooh,
And
yes.
there were everything from the automats then
Yep.
to the very shishi dining clubs that people went to and things. So yeah, that's all I can think of right now. Um,
Have you read Lillian Boxfish Goes for a Walk?
no, wait, let me write that down.
I think you'd really enjoy that one.
Okay.
It's an older woman reflecting on the fabulous life she's led, and she does this walk around New York City. And I feel like it must have mentioned food because when you were talking about senses and how you smell often or like hear, definitely heard cacophony in the excerpt that you read. I
Mm-hmm.
think I often use food as something to like ground my characters and like what's important to them or what makes them feel better. Can't
Hmm.
imagine why that connects with me.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Food is a great detail for fiction writers. I love it.
Hmm. And the food that you eat when you're starving in an unheated loft, and then the
Mhm.
food you eat when you've become successful.
Is that in La Luministe?
Nope, that's in the new one.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Oh, nice. Okay. Very
Yeah.
cool. Little teaser.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Little teaser.
Well, thank you so much for coming on my channel. I'm excited to like have met you through Yola and then sort of pull you through to be a guest on the channel now that I'm more of a booktube talk about books all the time person.
Hmm.
Um, we're going to be dropping a link for the next place you'll see me, which is this Friday for Shannon's Pyramid Wars of Productivity. So I'll pop that in the chat there. Since it is NaNoWriMo in November, Native American Heritage Month, Month for Gratitude, National Novel Writing Month, a lot is going on the booktubes. So be sure to check out lives going on, books being reviewed, readathons being participated in, especially Skoden and Nonfiction November, because those are the ones I'm doing. But you'll see some content for that later on. Oh, Shannon's contributing the food you eat when you're on a diet in your 40s. Yep,
Sure.
yep,
That
yep.
doesn't get any better.
That's why we can always find good things in fiction, right?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Margaret, thank you so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. So I'm just putting up the banner. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today. It was lovely to see you in the chat. Go buy La Luministe about Berthe Morisot by Paula Butterfield. Maybe put it on a gift list. And I will see you guys on Shannon's channel Friday and back on mine for a book tag on Sunday.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Au revoir.